Of course, there's a lot of anticipation with many people hoping that he'll be able to fulfill their wishes. Before I get into my interview with the business sector, let me hand it over to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
And of course, we did hear earlier on that the finance minister is looking to basically narrow
where Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana will deliver this year's budget speech. Let's take this conversation now to the parliamentary leader of Al Jama, Mr. Imran Musa. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And firstly, as Al Jama, what would be your key takeouts for the minister for you to be pleased?
Thank you so much. So basically, from Al Jama's perspective, we're very excited, anxious to hear what the minister has to say today to address mainly the priority issues and the challenges our people face. Obviously, the first one would be the water crisis in our country, and we know there's a shortfall of about 400 billion. And that, in terms of a health hazard as well, could pose as a risk. So we're hoping to hear how that 400 billion will be accommodated for as number one priority. Then we have the military intervention, obviously to assist the police. So we would also like to hear how much of the funding that will be allocated for the military that will be assisting our police. And then we also have the pensioners. Obviously, the pension fund is a serious issue because we know that I think in terms of giving dignity to the elders, we would like to see that the pension fund is increased. And with this, I think there's multiple other issues, but the shortfalls, in terms of the fiscal budget also poses as a risk because of the amounts that are limited to be budgeted for all these different departments. So I think that sums in a nutshell what Al Jama would love to see the minister deliver today. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Imran Musa, the leader of the Al Jama party here in the National Assembly. Taking this conversation forward now, Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi, thank you so much, sir, President of UAT. As the UAT, do you expect that the Finance Minister will continue with business as usual, or will it take a rapid turn in terms of growing the economy?
No, thank you very much. I always indicated that the SONA is a business plan, and the Minister of Finance have to finance the plan. And what the President has presented in the past, there's no plan. There's no plan in terms of how he's going to create jobs. There's no plan how he's going to redress the wrongs of the past in terms of land reform. Now, he has touted that there is what we call an economic turnaround, also including South African public finance, the state-owned enterprise service delivery. But when you look at that, it doesn't land on the ordinary South African citizen, the poorest and the working class. It's only been felt by the wealthiest. So we're looking forward to hear what he's going to say today, because the expectation is that they create a plan that will grow the economy, the plan that will actually create jobs for our people, because our people are hungry, our people are poor.
What would you do differently if you were the Finance Minister?
It doesn't start with the finance.
The Finance Minister.
It doesn't start with the finance, as I've indicated. It starts with the grand plan. It starts with the plan. Everything that we do, you'll realize that the reason our GDP improved in 2025, it is because of mining, because of agriculture, also related to issues of frail and rail. Now, you invest in such and invest in energy, because energy has attracted the investors. But now, what is happening now, it's only being felt by the wealthiest. Every time the GDP improves, there must be a bread on the table of the poorest of the poorest. So you start with the plan and then you finance the plan. So the last SONA and the finance, they go together. You can't separate them. So basically, we don't have a business plan. What we have is a neoliberal policy that started in 2019. It's a continuation of that in terms of privatization of electricity, privatization of water. When you see no water in Midrand and in Sandton, it's only because it's a process of privatization, you see. So that is where we are.
All right, let's leave it there. Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi, the president of the UAT. I believe Nompu is standing by with more expectations.
Thanks very much. Yes, well, it's just less than 30 minutes now before the finance minister gets his speech underway. We hope that everything's going to be on time. Remember what happened this time last year? We hope that's not going to happen again. And we trust that it's not, because the situation is different now. There's a proper understanding that there is a government of national unity, and that consultation needs to take place before any brave moves are made in terms of fiscal policy or any other policy for that matter. Politicians are beginning to, or have started going into the plenary room in the Dome where the speech is going to be happening. So I'm joined by Hanki Matabane. He's the CEO of the Black Business Council. And just to get his views very quickly on what his expectations are. Hanki, thank you so much for joining us. So we know that business is, not very happy with the water situation. Things have improved in terms of electricity. Sometimes there's the issue of incentivization and just a good policy environment where policy is certain, etc., etc. What are your feelings and what are your hopes around what will come out of today's budget speech?
Thank you very much for having us, and we also hope we are not going to go back home without any budget speech being approved. The minister is in a very, very difficult position. The taxes that the SARS is collecting, out of every R1, 22 cents goes to repayment of interest, not repayment of the loan. So it's got a very, very, very limited space to operate. And you can't keep on taxing business or taxing individuals, because there's a maximum where if you keep on taxing people, either you're going to start losing people who are paying tax, and they're going to immigrate to other countries, or people are just going to find ways of not paying tax. So it's a very, very complicated situation that the minister finds himself in. But beside all these other points, it's very important that whatever we fund, we don't fund expenditure, we fund capex, because once you find capital, you'll be able to create jobs.
Yes.
Because remember, the problem in South Africa that we have is economy is not growing. It's been growing by less than 1% for a long time. We've got serious unemployment crisis, but you can't solve that through taking all the money to grants.
Yes.
You have to fund infrastructure, you have to fund businesses, black businesses, small businesses, women-owned businesses, because once you find those businesses, you are increasing the tax base.
Yes.
Because that's what we need. We need the tax base to be increased.
I'm going to come back to you just now. I'm learning that the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, has entered the general area, as well as the SARS Commissioner, Edward Kiswita. So their presence here suggests that we are ready to rock and roll. And perhaps I can just hand it over to my colleague, Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Nombu. Of course, the entourage of the finance minister is making its way into the Dome, but I'm going to take a sharp left and call in now Soviet Likhanyane, the chairperson of the ad hoc committee investigating the allegations raised by General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Firstly, yesterday you were at school, I believe, and you were absent, but a significant thing yesterday, the apology coming from Brown Mokhotsi. As the chair, what you are doing?
I was absent from work, but present in the classroom. First of all, I think what we should do is to thank the Office of the Speaker and the members that we have in the Portfolio Committee. At some point, we had to deal with uncertainties whether Messrs. Paul O'Sullivan and Brown Mokhotsi were going to appear before the committee. But through understanding and complementary effort, and the support that we got from the leadership of the Speaker's office, we ended up having both witnesses appearing before us. And I must remind you, Mr. Paul O'Sullivan is coming back tomorrow.
Yes.
And for sure you might have seen that towards the end of the proceedings last time, when we were with him, he was the one who was more worried about time to say yeah, but you can't call me here and there is no time. Can I have sufficient time? Then we said, no. Can we agree that you will come back next time where maybe we can afford you an extra day? He's coming tomorrow. We will see how much time we have with him. If the thirst is unquenchable, we will still discuss between ourselves within the time allocation that we have until the 31st of March. But it's a very good thing for South Africa. It's a very good thing for the committee that so far all the witnesses that we have agreed that we must have them are on board. There is one understanding that we should have them appearing before the committee.
The extensions of the committee, have they had any impact on funding the work of the committee?
Look, there is no way that from the first day a decision was taken that the ad hoc committee must be put in place. It meant financial implications because it was not there on the APP of Parliament. It was not there under special projects in the office of the Speaker. So it means funding has to be sourced elsewhere. And we must thank all the authorities, the Minister of Finance and the Office of the Speaker and the Finance Department in Parliament for having sourced funds that will help the committee to do its work. It's a very important committee for the people of South Africa. We have had 3 extensions so far, and you can imagine what it means financially because the legal team that we have has to be remunerated for its services. Other logistical arrangements that we make as the committee meets every day also have financial implications. So the whole logistics around it and the professional services that have to be provided have financial implications. As and when we extend, we need to understand that there is one very paramount aspect that cannot be overlooked. That is the financial implications.
All right, thank you so much, Soviet Lekanyane, the chairperson, or rather, the benevolent chairperson of the ad hoc committee. Nombu, I believe you've got a guest standing by.
Thanks very much for that, Bulelani. Well, of course, we're just maybe 15 minutes away before the finance minister delivers that much anticipated speech. He is here, the SARS commissioner is here. That's the guy who's been collecting the revenues and seemingly very well. But before we do get to that speech, let's have a quick conversation with Martin Ackerman. He is the chief economist at Citadel. Thanks very much, Martin, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you join us on Budget Day. What are your broad expectations?
Well, I just thinking back to last year this time, we were sitting talking and the speech was cancelled. Our bond yield was at 11. And if you think where we are today, I think the speech will happen. That's the first thing. Government of National Unity is in a much better footing together. And our bond yields are around about 8. So if you just look at that as a single item, you know, the interest payment is much less because we're not paying 11% anymore, we're paying 8% on the bonds. So that's an improvement. You've mentioned about tax collection, much more efficiencies in terms of that. And then thanks to Mr. President Trump, the commodity boom that we've seen, and that had a huge impact on the fiscus. So there is definitely more money in the fiscus that we are looking forward to hear what they're going to do with that. And I think that is the important thing. You know, government really stuck to managing the expenses, given a very tough environment for the last 5 years. And you don't want to see now that there's a little bit extra money that we're doing the wrong things.
Yeah.
So we want to see that it's still a sustainable fiscal framework over the next 3 years. You know, our growth is still not where it should be, and the commodity cycle can be gone tomorrow.
Indeed.
So we need to still focus on how do we get economic growth to increase so that we get into an environment where locally or domestically, you know, we can support the fiscus.
Martin, hold your thought there. Pause for a bit because I'm going to hand over to my colleague Bulelani Philip.
Thank you once again, Nompu. The A-team of Public Finances is inside, and I've managed to get the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo. Thank you so much for your time. Firstly, the climate of putting this budget together, how was it as the A-team?
No, the climate was very good, and I think what we usually do in putting together a budget, we start by analyzing the economy, by how much will the economy grow and how much are we going to generate revenue from the level of the growth of the economy, because there's a strong relationship between economic growth and the amount of money that we generate to provide what we need to provide for as government. And based on the analysis of the economy, we do say this is how much we're going to have, and therefore, given the needs, the expenditure needs of our society through different government departments, this is what we can afford. And if there's a shortfall, we also determine how much we're going to borrow in order to finance the deficit. So the team has been working very hard, National Treasury team, but also government, the cabinet under President Cyril Ramaphosa. He's been guiding us on how we should finalize this budget. And fortunately, this year around, we're not going to have 3 budgets. We're very confident that we're going to table one budget because there's been thorough consultation amongst government of national unity parties. So this year, we're not looking forward to the drama that we saw last year.
Should we expect budget cuts for the different departments? They've been complaining that they've been decreasing from the baseline. Should we expect budget cuts?
Let's wait for the minister to tell us that. In few minutes, he'll be outlining the budget, how it looks like. But all I can say is that we're continuing with the positive momentum that we've started when we presented the medium-term budget policy statement in October last year.
Lastly, before I let you go, does government have the appetite for more borrowing, or are you going to be slowing down?
Let's wait for the minister. I see you trying to reveal what's entailed in the minister. But very soon, the minister will lay out everything about the budget today. And we can talk about that after the minister would have tabled the budget.
Let's pause it there. I'll release you to go inside Dr. David Masondo, the Deputy Finance Minister. Nompu, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks very much for that, Bulelani. Well, it makes sense that the Deputy Finance Minister wouldn't want to take away the thunder from his boss. So it's just a few more minutes before we get into the detail of what's going to happen in terms of tax increases and spending plans, and how government is going to be working towards better ensuring that the private sector is crowded in so that they can also invest in the economy, expecting a reasonable return, because the fiscus alone can't afford the level of investment that's needed in the country to push it forward. A continuing conversation now with Martin Ackerman, the chief economist at Citadel. So Martin, when it comes to taxes, do you think that we're going to get minimal taxes this time around, given that it seems as though SARS has been doing quite well in terms of revenue collections?
Yeah, I think, the lesson from last year's attempt on the VAT is definitely not going to surface again. And also, back to our previous conversation that we had a nice tailwind. So the pressure is less to increase taxes. There's actually some room to adjust the tax brackets for bracket creep, which we haven't seen for a long time, the inflation adjustment, which will be a relief to consumers as well. And the normal sin taxes will be there, that's always there. So I think we don't expect significant changes to any taxes, given the tailwind that we've seen. But it's then in this framework you mentioned about crowding in the private sector.
Yeah.
If we go back to the solar incentives, their business received a 2-year incentive to go solar. And largely that solved the problem. So where we are right now, there's a lot of private participation initiatives, but there's no incentives because we just didn't have the money. So if we can use some of this to say, well, let's provide incentives to the private sector, we can have a similar positive result like we had with Eskom and solar to sort out the remaining issues with the logistical network, the ports and the likes. So that will be a productive way of using this windfall that we received instead of spending it on once-offs. Rather build long-term infrastructure capacity.
Let's wait and see what happens. Thank you very much, Martin Ackerman, Chief Economist at Citadel. Let me hand it over to Pulelani.
Thank you again, Nompu. I'm going to jump straight into it and call in now voter vessels from the Freedom Front Plus as the member of the GNU. Are you fully behind this budget that will be tabled here today?
Well, obviously, we only hear the details now, but I do believe it's a much better budget. I do believe that South Africa is moving in the right direction currently. You know, last year was the first year that we had a primary surplus since 2007. We are seeing much better economic growth. There's more revenue, but now it's what is being done with that more revenue. And also that does not only depend on the Minister of Finance or the budget, it's now all departments and all spheres of government that will have to spend that taxpayers' money better to get economic growth even better so that there's job creation and no corruption and waste of money.
I guess you would be looking forward to hear how does it budget for the infrastructure development plan, the ambitious plan. What's your expectation from him?
Well, I think we already saw in the adjustment budget last year that there's positive shifts and also structural reforms that's actually being implemented, not only being talked about, and moving and spending this higher revenue that we have had. We had higher tax income collection than expected, and that money can now be spent on infrastructure and realizing that infrastructure development plan. We already, for instance, see improvement in rail transport for the first time in decades, and that is because money is being spent on railroad infrastructure, and we want to see that today, further spending on those priorities and not spending on wrong priorities.
Lastly, what are the low-hanging fruits for job creation in your view as the FF+?
It is economic growth and getting government to work, getting all the red tape that is there that's creating problems for the private sector to create jobs out of the way. That is that low-hanging fruit. If we get infrastructure going and get our towns and municipalities operating efficiently, then there will be job creation.
All right, thank you so much. Voter vessels, a mouthful there. Of course, a focus on municipalities, particularly in this era of the water crisis and the water infrastructure collapsing. The President did, in his State of the Nation address, committed that the government would try and woo the private investors to ensure that they work with municipalities to ensure that our infrastructure is actually reconstructed and refurbished. And also, the response times must be quicker and efficient. Nompu, I'm going to cross back to you as we go to the final hour of this budget speech.
Thanks very much for that, Bulelani. Well, it's just a few minutes away before the finance minister does his thing. A bell is tolling in the background. I think it's just rallying people to get in to the dome so that they can be seated and that proceedings can get underway. A lot of expectations, of course, in the midterm budget policy statement. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana said he wanted a situation where there was a stable macroeconomic policy, a situation where there was an accelerated movement in terms of structural reforms. And we know that with Operation Vulindlela, they've now moved to a second phase where they're now focusing more on the delivery by local municipalities. Local municipalities are, of course, at the coalface of serving citizens, whether it's households or businesses. And we know from countless Auditor General reports that they have not been doing very well in this regard. And so if we don't have that particular issue addressed, obviously it means that we're just always going to be on a back foot. This year is the year of local government elections. And so speaking to analysts earlier, it's felt that major tax increases are unlikely to be levied because that would not be politically popular. But at the same time, it seems as though SARS has been doing quite well in terms of revenue collection, overshooting its targets month on month, which is a good thing. But the only problem is that it may not necessarily be sustainable because it largely comes from the windfall that it has come as a result of higher gold and platinum group metal prices, which is great, but may not last forever. One of the factors for that is the Trump factor. And of course, we know he's going to be in power for another 3 years or so. And thereafter, who knows what's going to happen. So our economy needs to be based on a more sustainable footing and based on a broader economic growth story that doesn't just look at our minerals. Although critical minerals continue to be an important part of the conversation and South Africa's future. And the President has talked on several times about the importance of leveraging critical minerals, of which South Africa has a great endowment, in order for us to prosper the country going forward. So it is just about 4 minutes or so before the speech is supposed to go underway. You remember this time last year, we started to have palpitations because we realized that something was amiss when we didn't see the president come into the area, we didn't see the finance minister, and lo and behold, the speaker made the announcement that indeed the budget would not go ahead. And then down the line, we found out it was due to issues around the plan to raise VAT by 2 percentage points. So we doubt very much that we're going to see a VAT increase because that would be very unpopular indeed. And maybe it's also because the fiscus has been doing quite well. SARS Commissioner Edward Kiswita is going to be leaving office sometime this year, very soon in fact, but a successor has not been appointed as yet. And given the history that SARS has had in terms of its management prior to his taking office, it's going to be quite important that we learn of who is going to succeed him, somebody that perhaps will continue in the mold that he has created, where SARS has become a reputable organization again and has been able to really improve its improvement in terms of collecting taxes. We know that it was given an additional 7.5 billion rands in order to be able to fortify its ability to extract tax where it needs to. So, so far, so good, but continuation of proper leadership will be needed in that regard. So, of course, the other issue is that when SARS now transfers, or National Treasury makes those transfers to provincial government, to local government, we expect those governments to use those funds profitably and properly. And we keep on hearing time and time again that this has not been happening. And I think that while one part of the system, the government system, is working, we need a situation where all of the systems are working and they're speaking together. They're not working in silos. There's high levels of accountability. We've heard that, of course, there's this issue of professionalization of the public sector, and that is going to be critical in ensuring that the funds that go into these various pockets are translated into public service delivery for us all. All right, now we're going to hand over to Bilelani.
All right, Nompo, just quickly before the House begins, I've got now Ngambayom Zikwangwa. UDM Chief Whip. Just briefly, Mr. Kwangwa, your expectations as the UDM?
Well, the first thing is to outline the growth strategy and to check whether the adjustments budgets actually did have the intended effect in terms of the gaps that they were trying to close within the expenditure framework of government. The government's plan, we're not expecting to see any tax increases. I mean, SARS recently said they were able to collect enough revenue. We're expecting them to have a reflection on the tax increase they spoke about. I think it was roughly about 20 billion, to see whether or not those proposals are going to be held back and whether some of the proposals are going to be made which are going to center around how we manage the debt to GDP ratio and how we grow the economy and fight unemployment.
All right, let's leave it there. Ngabayomzi Kwangwa, UDM Chief Whip. I believe that the House now is starting and we're going to cross inside the House.
Order, honorable members, can we please settle down? Order. We'd like to welcome in the House the President, Deputy President, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces and members of the NCOP, whom we have invited as guests. We also want to recognize our leaders of political parties, leaders of business, leaders of civil society, who are all with us here in the House. But most importantly, we also want to acknowledge members of civil society and their organization and communities who had various matches, but also reflections on their expectation on the budget. We do recognize them, even though they may not be in the House, and also our people at home. I see some members are looking at me with a smile, wanting me to recognize them individually. So all of you who have been smiling at me, I do see you and I recognize you. And I know here we've got students who are here representing their organizations and having expressed also their views that they think both in terms of education and the issues of young people, those will be catered for in the budget. So I want to recognize all of you and be happy this time that Minister of Finance and the Executive, Mr. President, were here for Budget 101. I don't think there will be Budget 2.0 like we had last time. But we had agreed, Mr. President and Minister of Finance, that if today you are not ready, we were going to have a budget tabled with or without your agreement, because at the end of the day, Parliament passes the budget. So I will now ask to announce that the vacancy which occurred in the National Assembly owing to the resignation of Ms. T.G. Shiviti has been filled by the nomination of Ms. Zamakanyase Kanyase with effect from 24. Order, honorable members. This vacancy has been filled with effect from 24 February 2026. The member has made and subscribed the oath in the Speaker's office. I want to welcome Honorable Zamakanyase, and if you can stand so that members can see you. Thank you very much, Honorable Member. I will ask the Secretary to read the first and second orders.
Introduction, Appropriation Bill, and tabling of the Division of Revenue Bill. And Introduction, Special Appropriation 2025-26 Bill.
Thank you. The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Honorable Speaker, Togo Didiza, Deputy Speaker Anneli Lotriat, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, Honorable Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Cabinet colleagues, the members of the Budget Council and the Budget Forum, Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Lesesha Kganyago, Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, Edward Kisbertan, Chairperson of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, Patience Mbava, honorable members and fellow South Africans, I have the honor to table the following documents before this House. The 2026 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2026 Appropriation Bill, the 2025-26 Special Appropriation Bill, the 2026 Estimate of National Expenditure, the 2026 Budget Review, and this 2026 Budget Speech. Honorable members, we've reached the important turning point in the management of our public finances. 5 years ago, the outlook was stark. State capture had hollowed out critical institutions and weakened state-owned institutions. South Africa had been downgraded to junk status by the last of the three major credit ratings agencies in 2020. The devastation of the coronavirus pandemic, coupled with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, had dealt a blow to the global growth. And in 2023, the Financial Action Task Force had placed South Africa on its grey list. The warning lights were flashing. Public finances were under severe strain and growth had stalled. Faced with this crisis, we chose not to be defined by it. Instead, we turned it into a catalyst for change. We commit to a clear reform agenda and we committed to a clear reform agenda and a disciplined fiscal strategy built on three principles: stabilize debt, invest in infrastructure, and spend better. Today, that commitment has delivered tangible results. For the first time in 17 years, debt will stabilize and it will continue to fall in the coming years. The budget deficit has narrowed significantly, and the debt service costs are also falling. The world has taken notice. South Africa has been removed from the FATF grey list. We secured our first credit rating upgrade in 16 years, and borrowing costs have eased, creating space for growth and development. These are signals of restored credibility, of renewed resilience, and of a nation regaining its foot. The lesson is a simple but powerful one. Steady structural reform and responsible public finances are the bedrock of a prosperous and more inclusive South Africa. Honourable members, allow me to turn to the global and domestic economic outlook. The global economy is projected to grow by 3.3% in 2026, broadly in line with last year's outcome. Advanced economies are expected to grow moderately, while emerging markets will continue to anchor global momentum. India and sub-Saharan Africa in particular are forecast to grow more strongly, supported by resilient domestic demand. These developments are unfolding within an unprecedented global trade environment, characterized by persistent geopolitical tensions and shifting trade policies which are reshaping supply chains. In response, we need to diversify our trade portfolios and secure our markets, reduce vulnerabilities to external shocks, and position ourselves to benefit from the emerging global growth centers. On the domestic front, our growth outlook is steadily improving. We project real economic growth of 1.6% in 2026, an improvement from the 1.4% estimated in 2025. This improvement reflects the continued strengthening of economic performance from the second half of 2025. Over the medium term, growth is expected to average 1.8%, reaching 2% by 2028. Persistent logistics, bottlenecks, weak public infrastructure, and the recent outbreak of the foot and mouth disease continue to weigh on economic activity and pose risks to the outlook. In the light of this, rapid inclusive growth remains our only durable path forward. Our efforts to promote faster economic growth continue to revolve around 4 pillars. First, maintaining macroeconomic stability, implementing structural reforms, investing in growth-enhancing infrastructure, and build state capacity. These pillars are the foundation upon which inclusivity is built and how we ensure that growth is faster. Madam Speaker, a key facet of macroeconomic stability is prudent fiscal management that advances socio-economic obligations. Our fiscal strategy involves 4 features. A, support economic growth by accelerating public investment, improve the efficiency of public spending, improve the composition of spending by containing the public service wage bill while increasing capital investment, entrenching sustainable public finances with a principles-led fiscal anchor. We are already reaping the fruits of this strategy. The consolidated budget deficit has narrowed to 4.5% of GDP for 25-26, an improvement from 4.8% that we estimated in the 25 budget. The deficit falls to 4% in 26-27 and 3.1% the year after. Gross debt stabilizes as share of GDP in 25-26 at 78.9%. In 2026, it falls further to 77.3% of GDP and declines to 76% by 28-29. This slightly higher debt peak this year reflects weaker nominal GDP growth and our decision to take advantage of strong investor demand in domestic and global markets by increasing our issuance in 25-26. The main budget primary surplus for 25-26 reaches 0.9% of GDP. In the next financial year, it expands to 1.6% and then to 1.9% in 27-28. By 28-29, we see it reaching a 2.3%. Honorable Speaker, to sustain fiscal discipline, we intend to continue the engagement on fiscal anchors. We aim to introduce a proposal of a principle-based fiscal anchor in the medium-term budget policy statement after thorough consultation in Cabinet, Parliament, and with the public. Just as inflation targeting provided clarity and credibility to monetary policy, the fiscal anchor aims to entrench fiscal credibility. Madam Speaker, the structural reforms to lift growth we are implementing alongside the fiscal strategy reflect and understanding that the state should adjust to the needs of the national economy in a flexible way. Operation Vulindlela must be understood in this context. In terms of energy reforms, we're stabilizing electricity supply and building a competitive, reliable energy market. Regulatory reforms in this sector have unlocked significant private investment, accelerating generation capacity and driving the transition towards cleaner, reliable power. In logistics, we're dismantling bottlenecks in rail and ports that have throttled exports and raised the cost of doing business. Our intention is to bolster public-private investment in rail operations while retaining state ownership of the rail infrastructure. The objective is to move goods faster, cheaper, and more reliable. Reforms in local government include shifting to a performance-linked utility model for water and electricity services. This is aimed at strengthening financial sustainability, accountability, and transparency. Spatial and housing reforms focus on restructuring our cities to ensure that people have access to affordable housing located closer to centers of economic activity. This is a systematic effort to remove the structural blockages that have held back growth for many years. Madam Speaker, over the past 3 years, our tax system has demonstrated resilience despite slow economic growth. For 25-26, the gross tax revenue is revised upwards by 21.3 billion compared to the estimate in the 25 budget. Higher than expected net VAT, corporate income tax, and dividends tax collections improved the year-in-year outlook. As a result, government has decided to withdraw the 20 billion in tax increases provisionally included in the May 25 budget. The improved fiscal position allows us enough room to withdraw the proposed tax increases without putting fiscal sustainability or economic activity at risk. We are also proposing additional tax measures to ease financial burden on households and businesses by adjusting personal income tax brackets and rebates fully in line with inflation. Ndibuyisela imali back ezipokothweni zenu. Earners and in tax ngoku ndinika nje imali back. Madam Speaker, our national savings and investment rate is far below the levels needed to truly create generational wealth and support local investment in the economy. To encourage South Africans to save more, we propose that the tax-free annual investment limit be increased from 36 to 46,000 per year. The limit to retirement fund deductions be raised from 350,000 to 430,000, allowing individuals to invest more each year on a tax-free basis. Madam Speaker, each year we ask South Africans to send in their tips for the budget. This year we got more than 1,200 citizens sent us their opinions and suggestions. Renate Oosthuizen, a small business owner from Gauteng, had this tip. Minister Godongwana, please increase the VAT registration threshold for small business to 2 million. The 1 million threshold has not kept pace with the cost of doing business, close quote. Renate, you will be happy to know that in this budget, the compulsory VAT registration threshold increases from 1 million to 2.3 million. We are taking other measures to support small business. We are raising the capital gains tax exemption for the sale of small business for older persons from 1.8 to 2.7 million. This applies to small business worth 15 million instead of 10 million previously. It will enable small business owners to receive more tax relief when they sell their business. Madam Speaker, increases to certain taxes are unavoidable. That's the bad part of me. For 2026, excise duties on tobacco will unfortunately be increased in line with inflation. This includes excise duties on electronic nicotine and non-nicotine delivery system. As a result, a tax of 20 pack of cigarettes rises from 22.81 to 23.58. Pipe tobacco rises by 28 cents per 25 grams, and cigarettes tobacco by 87 cents per 50 grams. Cigars rise by 4.56 per 23 grams. The excise on alcohol beverage also rises by inflation. As such, a 340 milliliter can of beer or cider increases by 8 cents. A 750 milliliter bottle of wine goes by 15 cents. A 750 million bottle of spirits will increase by 320. In terms of the fuel levy, the total increase will also be in line with inflation. The general fuel levy will go up by 9 cents per liter for petrol and 8 cents per liter for diesel. The carbon fuel levy will go up by 5 cents per liter for petrol and 6 cents for diesel. The road accident fund fuel levy will increase by 7 cents per liter. Honourable members, the strong revenue collection this year and the overall resilience of the tax administration reflects an efficient and agile tax administration, continually improving through targeted compliance initiative. However, the scourge of illicit trade represents a major threat to these hard-won gains. It threatens our economy, endangers consumers, and robs the fiscus of billions in revenue. The recent announcement by a major tobacco producer that will close its local operation is a stark reminder of the impact of illicit trade on the jobs and overall economy. The sophisticated and organized nature of illicit operations demands an intensive effort to curb this trade, secure prostitutions, and dismantle its supply chains. SARS has already intensified its efforts. It will also continue its joint operations with border management, the SAPS, and the Defence Force. I always improvise. Wait a little.
Order, honourable members, can the minister continue with his speech?
Yes, this thing has failed me.
It's page 7, Minister, page 7.
Order, honourable members, I know you are trying to help, but you should have raised it through the speaker. Thank you very much, Honourable Mawuja. Minister, you can proceed.
I said SARS has already intensified its efforts. It will also continue its joint operations with the Border Management Agency, the SABC, and the Defence Force to stop the illicit trade in tobacco. I'm going to come back in later when I talk about the crime and peace and security. On the financial sector, Madam Speaker, National Treasury continues to work on ensuring that financial services customers are treated fairly and the sector operates optimally. One key issue is the more than 88 billion rand of unclaimed financial assets and benefits. Following recommendations from the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, National Treasury will introduce reforms to manage these unclaimed benefits through the creation of a central administrator responsible for record keeping and tracing. We will also shortly publish draft regulations under the Currency and Exchange Act to include crypto assets in our capital inflow management regime. Crypto assets will now be governed in the cross-border movement of capital framework, which will be complementary to regulations already in place to prevent use of crypto assets to launder money and commit fraud. The use of data and artificial intelligence has become a critical for the future development of economies worldwide. As such, data infrastructure should be considered as critical as electricity, ports, and transport networks. This year, we will explore options to help data centers and related infrastructure to expand this investment in South Africa and solidify our role as a regional hub for these technologies. One of the main policy objectives is to ensure that the financial sector supports regional integration and the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. National Treasury is easing restrictions on the cross-border flows of capital by enabling domestic asset managers to manage portfolios of foreign assets. This will improve competitiveness and allow South Africans to co-function as a hub for investment into the continent. National Treasury, working with the South African Reserve Bank, has prioritized modernizing the national payment system and innovation in digital finances. The payment ecosystem management has achieved its first milestone, and with the establishment of the payments utility, which was completed in November last year, with the establishment of Pay-in Corporation. Pay-in will provide open, shared digital payments infrastructure to support operational ability across various payment providers, serving as the main platform for high value and retail transactions. In the budget in May 25, we made the statement that we will do everything possible to use savings arising of expenditure reviews to fund future projects. In other words, tax will be the last resort. Madam Speaker, in this context, in this budget last year, as we have said, we have kept that promise through our commitment to finding savings from unproductive expenditure, closing leakages, and rooting out inefficiencies. I'm happy to announce that 12 billion in savings have been identified over the medium term. Targeted and responsible savings are not a once-off initiative. They will be an ongoing and entrenched part of the budget process going forward to weed out inefficiencies and low-performance programs. Every program and every allocation must demonstrate value, efficiency, and accountability. As part of this process, the public transport network grant has been scaled down by about 8.4 billion over the next 3 years. The grant has not improved access to public transport relative to the investment made. The grant will, however, continue to help cover indirect costs in cities that run business bus services. Enhanced targeting of social grants authentication of beneficiaries to reduce fraud in the grant system will yield 3 billion of savings. The South African Social Security Agency has its biometric and income verification process resulted in nearly 35,000 grants being identified as incorrect, fraudulent, and therefore terminated. Honorable members, we are committed to improving access to the many South Africans deserving and eligible for social support. Abuse of the system, however, will not be tolerated. The remaining savings from the TARS are reallocated to strengthen capacity in the judiciary, border management, defense, and state SAC. Madam Speaker, to secure the skills essential to modern economy, government is reforming the national skills ecosystem. The skills development levy paid by employers to fund sector education and training authorities or SETAs and the National Skills Fund have not yielded the outcomes we expected. We must improve how we equip individuals ready to enter the labor market. Beyond providing them a theoretical understanding, the government will explore ways to reorganize training by introducing a dual training skills acquisition system. We are looking at how institutions with the capacity to train job seekers and graduates can tool them with artisanal skills. Turning to the spending priorities, the budget we're tabling this in for 26-27 will spend 2.67 trillion rand. This spending includes a proposed 5 billion in the contingency reserves to cater for disasters declared since the medium-term budget policy statement. In other words, the disasters that took place in January this year. Government spending remains highly distributive. The social wage accounts for more than 60% of non-interest spending over the medium term. Basic education, health, and social protection constitute 70.3% of the social wage in 26-27. Providing support to 13.6 million school children, healthcare service to 84% of the population, social grants to 26.5 million beneficiaries. Coming to social grants, bendicinga ogogo ndizabanyusela kakhulu kodwa ndibanyuselanga ngolu hlobo bendicinga uba zabanyusela ngalo kulo nyaka. Kodwa ndiyabanyusela. Kodwa ndiyabahoya. Kodwa ndiyabahoya. Social grants are allocated 292.8 billion rand, enabling the following increases. The old age grant, disability grant, and care dependence grants rise by 80 rand in April 2026 to 2,400. The same applies to the War Veterans Grant, which increases by 80 rand to 2,420. The foster care grant goes up from 1.2 in April, a 40 rand increase, and to 1,300 in October, a 10 rand increase. Child support grant and grant in aid grant increased by 20 rand. The social relief of distress continues in the current form over this year. Let me clarify. The SRD is in the baseline of the budget. That's not in dispute. When we say continue, the president said it should be converted into a libelous term. What we will then be doing during the course of the year, between now and the next financial year, is to give content to that. Is to give content to that, what is going to look like, what is being eligibility criteria, and so on and so on. So there's no dispute that is not going to be in the system. On peace and security, Madam Speaker, the President in his State of the Nation announced the deployment of the Defense Force alongside police to fight illegal mining and gangsterism. To support this and other efforts to intensify law and order, Spending on peace and security increases from 268.2 billion in 2025-26 to 291.2 billion in 28-29. Border Management Authority has been allocated an additional 990 million rand over the medium term to build capacity by filling 738 posts. 2.7 billion is added to defense over the medium term to improve operations, including maintaining the South African Air Force fighting capability. A quick question arises, and people was also asked this question in the media, about what about the additional deployment of the Defense Force? I'm saying the law acknowledges that the President may at any point in time deploy the armed forces. It doesn't say the President will first check whether there's a budget or something else. If there's war tomorrow, he can say, hey, just go and sit and have a budget. No, the war is going to send the army to go and fight. That's how these things work. Then it's for us to say, in the light of that, Section 16 of the Act of the PFMA considers that deployment as an emergency. We will be working with the Defense Force in this regard to finalize that. But in addition to this, we have given both the Defense Force and the police through the CARA Fund 1 billion each. 1 billion the police, 1 billion the Defense Force for crime prevention strategy. Over the medium term, 883 million is shifted from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development to the Office of the Chief Justice. This will enable the Office of the Chief Justice to manage its own budget, enhance its independence from the executive from the 1st of April this year. Similar arrangements for the funding of Parliament are being undertaken in the spirit of separation of powers. In other words, Parliament itself must not rely on this executive for the performance of its functions. An additional 687 million has been allocated to increase capacity in the judiciary over the medium term. The President also announced the establishment of special courts. Once the costing is finalized, allocation for this will be considered later in the year. We have had a discussion with the judiciary insofar as this is concerned, together with the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, and examining how do we give effect to this injunction by the President. We have agreed on 3 phases. The first one is that there are courts that currently are under pressure, and we need to see how can we deal with that pressure. Secondly, we need to look at what does this mean, this establishment of these additional courts in terms of the number of judges? And how soon can we do that? And we have put up some technical teams with the Office of the Chief Justice to pursue this injunction by the President. There are also a number of commissions of inquiry which are taking place. Some of them have asked for an extension. We'll also be looking at how do we fund that extension over time. The special appropriation we're tabling before you of 8.5 billion today looks at 5.8 billion for PRASA rolling stock fleet renewal program. If I may explain to you, how does this thing work? PRASA has had a contract with Gibela. They've got to order a minimum of 35 locomotives per annum. If failure to order 35 is a breach of contract. So we've got to make sure that PRASA continues with its contractual obligations. We've got to pay for up subscription to the World Bank, which we have not been paying for a while. of about R1 billion. We are providing 700 million rand to the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. We are making this money to the department without earmarking it, because we want them, for now, while we are looking into the details of how we're going to fund the Centec Diet, the SABC, and the SAPO. They should be able to meet this through this flexibility. On the division of revenue, which is the division of revenue says how money between the different spheres of government is allocated. 48.9% of national raised revenue is allocated to national government, and 41.7% to the provinces, and 9.4% to local government. I must express this point, Mr. President, that although the quantum that goes to to municipalities is increasing, but as a percentage of the share, there's a decline from about 9.7 to 9.4. And I think it's something we need to be attending. Translated into rands and cents, national gets 951 billion rand, provinces 810 billion rand, municipalities 182 billion rand. Additional allocation to provinces equitable share include 348 million rand to progressively equalize grade R teacher pay, 340 million rand for early retirement and voluntary exit programs, 390 million rand for the Presidential Employment Initiative. 1.5 billion is added to provincial roads maintenance grant in the 26-27 to fund the carry-through costs of disaster that occurred between April 2024 and June 2025. Basic education. In terms of the consolidated expenditure, spending on education remains the largest component at 23.7% over the medium term. Basic education receives 22.7 billion for carry-through costs announced in May 2025. Early childhood development receives the majority of these funds. 9.9 billion supports employee compensation and other pressures in education. Early childhood, as I've said, development grant receives an additional 12.8 billion over the next 3 years, expanding services to an additional 300,000 children. This will also maintain the increase per child per day subsidy of 24 rand introduced in 25-26. The increased allocation aligned to the National School Nutrition Program to food inflation to continue to provide meals to over 9.9 million learners in almost 20,000 schools. In health and education, Madam Speaker, 26 billion rand is allocated to provide provinces to bolster our HIV/AIDS program, such as the prevention of mother-to-child transmission and the provision of antiretroviral drugs. That's 26 billion. A part of the targeted responsibility and saving initiative, provinces will repurpose some of their funding. We've agreed on this with provinces. Some of their funding to meet the obligation towards the PEPFAR. This follows the funding withdrawal by the United States of America. 21.3 billion is allocated to health sector over the medium term for the compensation and employment of doctors and to make up for the shortfalls in goods and service expenditure. On local government, 86 billion is to support the provision of free basic services to 11 million households, assuming, I'm making this assumption, assuming these 11.2 households are in the indigent register. If they are not, there's a challenge. Local government is the sphere where communities experience the state most directly. Yet, many municipalities are in financial and operational distress and therefore unable to deliver services as they should. Audit outcomes highlight this unacceptable reality. 63% of municipalities are in financial distress, and the proportion of clean audits remains unacceptably low. A central challenge with municipalities is that they not only differ in capacity, but also in their revenue-raising potential. This demands a more targeted approach to respond to the diverse pressures facing municipalities. The National Treasury is vital in support for development of long-term financial plans. These plans will improve project identification, sustainable planning, cash flows, and inform financial decisions. This will negate the challenge of unfunded mandates and limited capacity to maintain infrastructure and sustain services. Further structural reforms are underway, including a comprehensive review of the local government fiscal framework, together with the comprehensive review of the local government work paper. Together, these reforms will modernize the intergovernmental system and build a more capable, resilient, and appropriate differentiated local government sphere. There's what we have called the metro trading system, which we have been raising in Parliament. Essentially what it means that we are incentivizing municipalities to treat their water services and their electricity utilities as business entities which should be run professionally. As a result, we are providing money for this purpose to incentivize municipalities, and we're providing about 27.7 billion. So, and another one, 64 billion. But let me just tell an important story. If you pay an electricity to a municipality, you are not paying an electricity bill outside the bill of the municipality. And if you are paying water, you are not paying outside the water separately. What are the side effects of this? Some effect of this. Johannesburg. They collect about 9 billion rand on water. But because it goes into the main port, what actually comes back into investment into the water, Johannesburg water, is 1 billion rand out of that 9 billion rand. The implications are services. There's no maintenance of the water system. I'm not saying that's the only problem with the water challenge we face. That's one minor problem. If we solve that problem, we can be able to fix leaks and so on. But it won't deal with the fundamental challenge, which is the infrastructure they are dealing with is old. A challenge we need to be discussing as government is how do we deal with that infrastructure. A second area I want to deal with on municipalities is the reform of the infrastructure grant system, municipal infrastructure grant system. Let me just again capture this thing by using an example. Capture this system by using an example. When in 2024, some municipalities had disaster and we provided them with money. In 2025, the same municipalities, there was disaster in the same municipalities. When we gave them the money in 2025, they had not used the 2024 money. Now, the point is, it's easy to say the money returns back to Treasury, but the effect of it is that the communities that have lost a bridge or something and still have that problem. So in this regard, the grant system will be reformed to make sure that we are going to provide the money to those institutions, even the district municipality or other accredited institutions, which will help those municipalities to provide the service. That's how this grant is going to be working. Now, coming to the infrastructure issues. Somebody says to me, what is this? Every day you talk about $1 trillion. Yes, because I'm announcing $1 trillion now. In the next outer year, I'll be adding another amount. It will still remain $1 trillion. So it's a rolling thing. How is this trillion broken down? 507 billion rand will be spent by state-owned companies and other public entities. All right? 217.8 billion rand by provinces and 205.7 billion by municipalities. Lastly, by sector, transport and logistics make up the largest share. Sandral will focus on strengthening long-term network resilience. This includes the annual maintenance of approximately 27,000 kilometers and the resurfacing of 2,000 kilometers of road. PRASA, as I've indicated, continues to implement its corridor recovery program and modernize core infrastructure to rebuild reliable, affordable rail service for commuters. This will enable the increase in annual passenger trips from 77 million trips in 24-25 to between 250 and 450 million trips over the medium term. In energy, investment will focus on improving the security of supply and mobilize private sector investment. In the medium-term budget policy, we announced that National, together with the World Bank, are making significant progress with the credit guarantee vehicle. The credit guarantee vehicle, which will support massive investment in transmission infrastructure, will be incorporated as a company in the coming months. Next, we will expand. We expect development partners to confirm their capital participation. Thereafter, the credit guarantee vehicle will apply for a license from the Prudential Authority. We are targeting the credit guarantee vehicle to be operational later this year. In water, investment are directed towards high-impact bulk water augmentation schemes, refurbishing of aging infrastructure, and the completion of strategic projects that support economic nodes and agriculture and household supply. Honored members, we continue to implement reforms to unlock greater private sector participation, enhance spending efficiency, and shorten delivery timelines. On triple Ps, we have amended the triple regulations as we have indicated. There are about 63 projects now at different stages of development. Key amongst them are the 6 border posts that we have announced in time, which are ready to be announced towards the finalization towards the end of the financial of the year. Similar progress with the Gautrain is being made. The conclusion of this project will close major PP transaction in more than 5 years. On the budget facility for infrastructure, the budget facility for infrastructure has approved 21.9 billion for 5 major projects. These include Transnet's coal and iron ore corridor projects, which will restore rail capacity to 7 million tons for coal line and 60 million tons for the iron ore line, and the Polokwane Regional Water Waste Program. As part of the efforts to position infrastructure as an inevitable asset class, government issued an infrastructure bond in 2025, raising 11.5 billion to support the contribution of the BFI approved projects. The BFI call for proposal for 26-27 cycle opens today, Dr. Mtswalet. What that means, both of those people who want to funding via the budget facility for infrastructure need to submit through the window which has been opened from today. We call on public institutions in key sectors of the economy to submit proposals with funding gaps and strategic value for consideration. This includes critical social infrastructure such as courts, correctional facilities. I know Dr. Groenewald has shown a keen interest in 2 specific prisons to be accommodated in this regard. These include also university infrastructure such as the University of Ekurhuleni. University of Ekurhuleni, I don't think is far from a realization, Mr. President. After your speech, I tried to dig into it and understand where it is. And it turns out the University of Ekurhuleni, there were 3 sites that were identified. There's 1 site which is proposed. All we need is the minister to go and visit the sites and make the approval. Once he has done that, according to the document, I'm learning, according to the document, all he needs to do is appoint a supervising university. Included in this project is going to be student accommodation. Then I was talking to the minister, Mr. President, and said it's going to be difficult for me to teach a communist about decommodification of student accommodation, because that's essentially the proposal I was putting across to him. On the health front, Dr. Mtsoredi has been up and fighting with me in every budget about 3 specific hospitals. George Munkari Academic Hospital, Inkosi Albert Lutilo Hospital, and Nelson Mandela Hospital. These are the hospitals which will form part of the BFI in the next round. And they're quite important in 2 respects, because they are linked to academic institutions. And secondly, are a demonstration of our commitment that we want to prepare for the implementation of the National Health Insurance by improving the quality of our institutions. Madam Speaker, progressive realization of the fundamental socio-economic rights enshrined in our Constitution is essential to our mission to deal with inequality, poverty, and unemployment. It is a mission that demands that we make prudent fiscal choices. With the health of our public finances comes a great degree of economic freedom and sovereignty. It is this sovereignty that gradually frees us from over-reliance on external debt. It shields us from inherent uncertainties of global finance and global politics. As we have witnessed over the last few years, the established norms of global order can shift and be undermined. To achieve our ultimate goal of better the lives of our people, we must continue pursuing this sovereignty. A budget and a fiscal strategy that advances inclusive growth and the sustainability of public finances is a crucial part of achieving this greater freedom. It moves us closer to fulfilling our constitutional promise to do all that it takes for our people to live with a dignity and prosperity. Madam Speaker, I'm grateful to the President and the Deputy President for their support and leadership. Thank you to Deputy Ministers of Finance, Mr. Sharupain and Dr. Masondo. Mr. Sharupain tells me that he wants also to be doctor. So he wants to do a PhD in fiscal rules. So he's going to compete with Masondo not to be the only doctor in the So I'm thankful to my deputy ministers and my director general and the team. My sincere thanks to the governor of the South African Reserve Bank. Let me thank my colleagues in the Ministers' Committee on the Budget and the Budget Council who have shared the task of difficult trade-offs that have to be made in the budget process. Similarly to the Parliamentary Committees of Finance and Appropriation, I express my sincere appreciation. And of course, to my dear wife who has made me so nice looking today. Even the president, I asked him today when he called me to the cabinet, I said, what is my business here, Mr. President? He said, no, we wanted to see how do you look like today. Madam Speaker, let me also take this opportunity to thank the Commissioner of SARS. The Commissioner of SARS, in order to have a better appreciation Where is he?
Order, honorable members. Actually, the minister was asking the commissioner to stand up. But I am grateful that all of you gave the commissioner a standing ovation.
Yeah. The problem is the members didn't even allow to contextualize this thing because it's quite important for when we thank the commissioner for the services done over 7 years, we've got to look at the kind of institution he inherited when he took over 7 years ago. It was an institution which was kind of hollowed out, not almost too close to non-functionality, to what the institution which the president in the State of the Nation address called one of the best institutions we've had. That's what the commissioner has done, and we thank him for that. And on behalf of government, I wish to express that unwavering support and thankful to them, because by the next budget, there'll probably be a new commissioner. That depends on the president. There'll probably be a new commissioner of that. So I also thank every South African. The budget reflects our shared journey and the belief that together we can build more equally, more prosperous economy. Yaguqa le kaChalbongo ikwenkwenku. Ngamachaba namabhongo kaChalbongo ke lawo. Enkosi.
Enoch, Mamchawe.
Order.
Adibo.
Order. Can we be seated? Thank you very much, Minister of Finance, for the presentation of the budget and the tabling of the budget instruments, which will now be referred to the appropriate committees for their consideration, and they will come back to the House. Minister, I'm sure you forgot one last sentence of thanking people. I want to thank all these members of Parliament who last year, despite the challenges of having 2.1, 3 point something, but they managed, worked hard, particularly our committees on finance and appropriation, to make sure that in July we were able to pass the budget. It wasn't an easy year, but I think these members of Parliament lived up to the task at hand. Thank you very much to all the honorable members. I will now ask members to stand and wait for the presiding officer and the maids to leave the House, and that concludes the business for the day.
of the budget speech by the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana. Of course, a lot of talking points, and we're going to unpack that with the political parties here on the floor of the Dome, the makeshift Parliament building. And I'm going to bring into the conversation now Steve Swart, the ACDP's Chief Whip. Your key takeouts out of this budget speech?
There is hope for the nation. The ship is starting to turn in the right direction, although it is still very slow. We're very grateful that there's been no increase in personal taxes, corporate taxes, and in fact that there is bracket relief for salary earners. On the other hand, we are still concerned that whilst the ship might be moving slowly in the right direction, there isn't that firm fiscal anchor, and debt is still too high. Coming in now at 78.9% of GDP, our debt service costs are far too high and are crowding out much needed expenditure on other items. Taxpayers are demanding every value for every rand that they pay tax. Better services, better education, better health, and they want to be safe in their homes. And we believe that is going some way, but not enough. There's still a lot to be done in this regard, but it does bring hope for the nation.
Growth outlook is quite positive. Your take on that?
It is positive, but it's still far too low to address the high levels of unemployment. We've got to have far quicker and far greater economic growth, and for that we need capital investment from the private sector. The Minister announced capital investment from the public sector. We don't see enough from the private sector, and we are hoping for far greater investment from the private sector so that we can stimulate economic growth far quicker to balance our books, to create jobs and bring hope to the nation.
All right, thank you so much, Steve Swart, the Chief Whip of the ACDP. I'm going to bring into the conversation now Voter Wessels, the FF Plus MP. The key takeouts for the FF Plus, did the Finance Minister strike the right course?
Well, as Steve just said, we are in a better fiscal position, we're in a better economic position, and there's a lot of positives, such as that there is personal income tax relief. That's very good. But the biggest problem is that the Minister of Finance does not determine how this money is really spent. He can say what money is given to what sphere of government, but the biggest loss of money and wrong spending occurs especially on local government level, and that remains of concern because that is where people actually feel how their taxpayers' money is or how their tax money is being spent, and there is a lot of wrong priorities, a lot of non-expenditure on infrastructure, and a lot of corruption that occurs there, and that is what remains of concern.
All right, thank you so much, Voter Wessels, the MP from the Freedom Front Plus. Let's check in now with the EFF leader, Julius Malema. Your takeouts from the Finance Minister's speech. Is it going in the right direction, our fiscal framework?
Well, he tried to balance the speech for simple reasons that it's an election year. So he wanted to come across as being reasonable, especially with the working class. But the reality of the matter is that the economy is not growing. And we all know that without the economy growing, we'll not be able to provide jobs, we'll not grow the infrastructure. Even if SARS collect more revenue, it doesn't mean economic growth. So we are worried that there is no plan about how the economy is going to be increased in the country. But equally, the president spoke about 10,000 labor inspectors. He never allocated any money for it. They were clapping hands for it, yet it's not budgeted for, which means that what the president said doesn't matter. The personal income tax adjustment, it's a very welcomed position. At least the workers will now have some money in their pockets. But to save 1.4 from the fiscal, it doesn't mean anything because saving 1.4 doesn't reduce the price of bread. The price of bread is still high. The electricity is still high. He keeps on speaking about partnership between private sector and the public sector. We've seen it happening in the electricity. Did that adjust the electricity price? No. The electricity price has increased. So the private sector has never helped anywhere to reduce any cost. If anything, the costs go high. That's why he says he's going to put more money in the transport infrastructure, bring the private sector so that it can reduce the cost in the railway. But it's not true that the private sector never reduces any cost. If anything, they are profit-driven.
What would you have done differently if you were in his shoes?
Well, we have to allocate more money in an infrastructure and build the state capacity and not be driven by all the desire to impress the IMF, wherein the people are not at the center of your budgeting, but if anything, is the so-called investors who are being impressed with this budgeting when the people on the ground are suffering. So we will concentrate more in the investment in the infrastructure, building state capacity so that we can create more jobs and ensure that we employ as many young people as possible. Let's see if eventually the University of Ekurhuleni will happen, because they've been speaking about it, but if it happens, good for all of us, because we've been waiting for it.
All right, thank you so much. That was Julius Malema, the EFF leader. For more reaction now, I'm going to cross to Nombu.
It's ours.
Who's that? What? No, I don't know about that.
But you announced something important, destabilizing for the first time in 17 years. Growth expected at around 1.6%. But is this the budget that's going to shift the needle for ordinary South Africans, similar to those who protested outside the president's?
Depending what you mean by that meeting. If we do what we're talking about effectively, even the growth as prospect can be higher. If you have wrote, for instance, the beautiful economic research of Stellenbosch, said the economic reforms we're talking about, if we were to fast track them, the growth would probably be more than 3.5%. That's the ambition we want, but we've got to analyze the reality and say, if we do things as they are, this is how the economy is going to work. But our ambition is above that.
Minister, what are you doing to directly deal with the water issue, which is of critical situation right now, similar to the electricity situation was a few years ago?
I said two things. I'm going to add a third one. I said two things. I said what is necessary is an immediate intervention to close leaks, repair pipes, and that's an immediate intervention that's necessary. But the infrastructure is old. You can't repair pipes no longer, and we've got to replace that infrastructure. I then said the second issue we need to do while repairing this infrastructure, the second thing that we need to do is the strategy to replace the old infrastructure. That's the second thing I said. But let me add a third one.
Is the 20 billion rand tax
Can I finish the third one? The third point is there's an immediate attention that needs to be given to Johannesburg. And I think that national government is going to take the necessary decision to attend to Johannesburg. What's the question? If you see, I couch it nicely. I say, despite that, because our fiscal position is healthy, we can sustain that in the long term. What?
Minister believes that we are on the right fiscal path. Let's check in now with Des van Rooyen, the MK Party's acting parliamentary leader. Mr. van Rooyen, your take on the finance minister's budget speech?
Look, the bedrock of any reliable budget is proper projections. We have been raising this matter with the minister for the past 3 years, that you will never get our budget properly if your projections are ill-informed. In 2024, he projected the growth of our economy to be at 1.1%. In 2025, he projected another 1.4%. Now he's projecting 1.6%. it's baffling as to what informs these projections, because they always get these projections wrong. They have been, even since 2024, the birth of this GNU government, they haven't realized their projected target. So
do you think it's deliberate? Do you think it's deliberate?
No, look, this is more of an exercise of balancing the book, more than addressing the plight of our people. Our people want employment now, and you only realize employment out of the growing economy. Our economy is not growing, it's growing slow, but our population is growing fast. So as a result, our people are forever pushed into the poverty trap, So our people don't want these fiscal ratios of primary surplus, or maybe what they usually refer to as debt stabilization. Our people want to hear how their lives are going to be improved. How are they going to be taken from the poverty trap? How are they going to get jobs? How are they going to, obviously, be part of the economy of their country? Because as we speak now, the disparities are very, very plain, are very, very clear,
All right, we look forward to your debate of the Finance Minister's budget speech. Let's bring in now Athol Trolip, the parliamentary leader of Action SA. Your key takeouts, particularly around the pronouncements on the tax relief.
Well, look, it's a much better budget than last year. We won't have budget 201 and 201. We're pleased that there will be no additional tax hikes and that any tax bracket creep will be inflation linked. I think that's really important. The other important thing is that we've been calling and championing more funding for SARS. We saw that it was worth it. I mean, SARS collected 28 billion rand more than expected. That means that the taxman doesn't have to go to out pockets. They must just get from people who owe SARS, get the money, and we can balance the budget. We're very concerned that there isn't enough funding for the illicit market, the economy. We've seen that border management have got 990 million rand more, but that's not enough, because if we just stop the sale of illicit cigarettes and alcohol, we can get 30 billion rand more for the fiscus. So we believe that there should be ring-fenced money to deal with the illicit economy, and there's not enough political appetite to do that. We're very concerned that we are not showing the kind of economic growth that we should be. The economy is stagnant at between 1 and 1.4%. That can't even absorb the matriculants that matriculate this year, let alone the 12 million people out of work. But lastly, I want to say that I'm pleased that the judiciary has been given some more money. We've seen that our courts are really battling, and that people who should be in court and then prosecuted and sent to jail are not getting there because our courts are dysfunctional. So this is a whole different kettle of fish to last year's budget, and we will monitor carefully how this budget is going to be applied, but it's much better than last year.
All right, thank you so much, Athol Trolip. Just quickly, Nhlanhla Hadebe, the chief whip of the Inkatha Freedom Party. As members of the GNU, do you support this budget tabled by the minister?
Look, we 100% support the budget tabled by the minister today, with over R1 trillion budgeted for infrastructure development and education, basic education, health and social protection, taking over 70.3% of the social wage. We are more than happy as the Inkatha Freedom Party about this budget. And on top of that, municipal infrastructure reform, which is critical for service delivery and development. We are more than happy about it.
All right, thank you so much, Nhlanhla Hadebe, the chief whip of the Inkatha Freedom Party. For more analysis and reactions, we cross back to Nombu.
With me, Ms. Gwen Ramakgopa. She is the ANC's Treasurer General. Thanks very much, ma'am. Just give us a sense of what you thought of the financial budget that was delivered today.
Thank you very much, and greetings to the viewers. The Minister has presented a budget that gives hope, and firstly that addresses the announcements that the President has made, which really lifted the morale and the spirit of the country. And secondly, he has alluded to the over 1,200 contributions by citizenry in his pronouncements. So it is a balanced budget, and a balanced budget that consolidates what we were saying, as we were referring to as the green shoots, that we have been taken off the grey listing, and also that the economy over the past 2 quarters has grown, and that the projection for growth are actually better, almost in the third year of the MTF at about 2% estimates. We have also invested in infrastructure, very concretely so, and meeting our obligations on PRASA. PRASA has made many people excited. Lines from townships to the cities, there's been improvements and all that, so that should be welcome. And also we must appreciate the investment in social services like healthcare and what the early childhood development, what the President has emphasized.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's hope that it all translates. Let me hand you over now to Bulelani Philip.
Well, standing with me now is Dr. Mmusi Maimane, Build One South Africa President, and we are going to jump straight into it. Mmusi, is there something for the poor on this budget tabled by the Minister?
Well, absolutely. And I think the most important issues that we've got to look at is the fact that we welcome the 1 billion rands investment that's going into policing. I think South Africa is a dangerous place. But if you really want to eradicate poverty, you want to make sure that the economy is growing at the right rate. And so the fundamental questions is that while we talk about investment in infrastructure, the stimulus on SMMEs, I do think South Africa needs to be able to create a better economic growth story to attract investment. So National Treasury can do its job, but we need to make sure that all the other departments do their jobs. Lastly, I do think it's absolutely important that when we look at where we prioritize, if you give money to VIP protection, 4 billion rands, and only 1 billion to the police, you are already telling people that politicians are much more protected than the citizens. Let's take that money, let's put it to detectives, let's fund for education, especially in quintile 1, 2, and 3, and let's furthermore make sure we eradicate corruption. Because whilst you might invest in healthcare in various places, but when Tembisa occurs, the poor are the one who are affected because money is stolen and then the poor can't get healthcare. So it's going to be important that Treasury does its job, but every other department must do likewise.
Lastly and quickly, the Minister also tabling the division of revenue bill, the ratio on the allocations between the three different spheres.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. I'm joined now by Solly Malatsi. He's the Communications Minister, and he's been handed over a fat wad of 700 million rand. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. What are you planning to do? Where do you expect to apply these funds? And how are you going to help little old me at the SABC?
Look, so as part of our submissions to the Minister of Finance, we had expressed where our immediate pressure points were. Part of it was the historic SABC debt at Centec, which currently amounts to 1.5 million. And there were also pressures around, other of our entities. The engagement we had before the announcement in here was that the 700 million will be earmarked towards clearing the SABC debt at Centec, primarily to ensure that from Centec's liquidity perspective, we keep the operations there, to ensure that all the broadcasters can have access to signal distribution, because as you know very well, signal distribution is an important element of making sure that the public has access to both radio and television media services.
And what about the funding model?
So the funding model, the next stage that is supposed to happen is the consultation with the Minister of Finance. You'd remember that we had been open about the fact that the service provider finished their report on the 6th of February. So what is happening between now is that we are engaging with the Minister of Finance because it has a direct impact on how potentially the allocation of finance is going to happen. Treasury, the Minister of Finance, in fact, is applying his mind to the proposals that are in there, right? So that from government's perspective, once we have finalized which of the options are in there, we can make the determination. And it's important that we do that with one voice, instead of saying this is what we prefer as Coms and this is what the Minister of Finance prefers, because the position is going to have a direct impact in terms of how we look, for instance, in terms of how government going forward makes allocations for the SABC, and secondly, how we look at how users and consumers of SABC content make a contribution towards the SABC. And the third element is the fact that any democratic society requires a public broadcaster because it plays an instrumental role in making sure that the public is informed, it's educated, and it's entertained. So it's taking all of this into consideration. I understand full well that there is a pressure for, what in Xhosa say, melebe ngoku. But the reality is we are looking for a solution that will live for generations. So we need to be forward-thinking in that approach.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time. That was Solly Malatsi, the Communications Minister. Let me hand it over now to Bulelani.
Well, for more reaction now, I'm joined by Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi, the president of the UAT, and jumping straight into it, the biggest issue coming into this budget is whether government is going to be able to stimulate economic growth. The pronouncements made by the minister, do they strike the right chord for you as the UAT?
No, I've indicated before, they've indicated that there is an economic turnaround. But the question is this turnaround failed by the ordinary South Africans, the poorest and the working class? The answer is no. An increase in petrol and diesel is an attack on the poorest and the middle class. So the answer is no. I'm saying it's no because there's also the biggest increase in grant is 9%. So you can see that there's no chance for the older people to buy nutritions and other stuff. So the answer is no. And that one, there's an issue of budget for future occurrences. That means now the government doesn't take the issue of hunger serious. Our people are hungry. Take the money, ensure that the resources reach the poor households. That is what we are saying. Our people are hungry. Our people are landless.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi, President of the UAT. Let's now check in with Ngabayom Zikwangwa, UDM Chief Whip. Tax relief announcements, did they go far enough?
Well, the budget is not too bad, not too shabby. It was about maintaining the status quo and stabilizing the finances of the country. To a limited extent, that has been achieved by government. But one could not really call it a growth budget, right? It's very conservative. It's trying to make sure that we sort out finances. We appreciate the fact that they are just going to adjust the tax tables for inflation, which is the bracket creep. It's going to give some relief to South Africans. The other issue which for us is not entirely clear is that the minister keeps on talking about how funds are allocated between the different spheres of government and the fact that the local government level, which is our municipalities, get 10%. We've been talking about the issue around the revenue raising capacity of the different municipalities. It doesn't seem like the formula is going to be tweaked yet. We do not believe that the grants alone are going to help us to address some of these challenges. We've said as far back as 2019 that we need to develop fiscal rules. In fact, we said it in Parliament before there was a fiscal rules bill or financial responsibility bill which was introduced so that we come up with clear targets insofar as the debt to GDP ratio and other fiscal variables so that we don't get a sense or in a situation where whenever someone else gets into office, they can actually do what happened in the last 10 years to the finances of the Republic.
Thank you so much, Ngabayom Zikwangwa, UDM Chief Whip. Dr. Mark Burke from the DA. Does the minister take us into a right direction in terms of the fiscal framework?
We think so. What we've seen today in the budget speech is some big DA policy wins. They include the fact that we're putting South Africans front and center. We're not suffering from increases in personal income tax or value-added tax. And not only that, there's some bracket creep relief, meaning if you earn an amount and you get an increase from your employer, you won't lose that by moving into a higher tax bracket and paying more tax on your income. So that's really good. Likewise, we, for the first time in almost 20 years, increased the VAT registration threshold from 1 million rand to 2.3 million rand. And what that does is it relieves the admin burden on small and emerging businesses. And it comes as a package of 22 types of limits and thresholds that have been increased and announced today. So that's very positive. On the whole, it's starting to look more like a budget that results from a coalition government as opposed to an ANC budget. And so that is positive. Some concerns remain. We've seen an allocation in the special appropriation bill to PRASA and a division within PRASA that deals with their so-called renewal of their rolling stock. And that organization and that division is riddled with corruption. And so that line item requires further scrutiny and does cause concern.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mark Burke. He's the DA spokesperson for finance. For more reaction, we cross back to you, Nombo.
Thanks very much. I'm joined by Vuyo Zungula. He's the head of ATM. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and for being patient. What were your thoughts about the budget this time?
The budget, the minister today basically campaigned for the ANC. You'll recall that it's an election year because, if people can ask themselves a question, last year there was this big issue because of the VAT increase. That is why the budget had to be postponed. Now, less than 12 months later, there's a new budget that has been tabled without anything new when it comes to increasing revenue. The question would be, last year, what necessitated that the VAT be increased if barely 12 months later there's no new revenue stream when it comes to increasing the budget? So that's the first issue. The second issue, the trend that we've always seen, when it's an election year, the budget always takes this posture. But immediately after, like they did last year, there was an election in 2024, in the 2025 budget, the first thing they did, they wanted to increase VAT. So that's what we picked up. And then the other issue is that our problems are structural. Whether it is poverty, it is unemployment. And the posture of this budget has remained largely the same over the past 10 years because inflation increase in terms of grants, in terms of what has been provided, does not do anything when it comes to dealing with the structural problems that we have in the country.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zungula. We'll speak to you further. Let me hand it over to Bulelani. He is with Kasatu.
Of course, the NOMPU Labour is also monitoring what the minister has delivered this afternoon, and we now check in with COSATU spokesperson Matthew Parks, the minister making pronouncements about reining in the public wage bill. Your reaction to that?
Look, we think it's a mixed bag. There's some good things in the budget. There's support to Eskom to roll out smart meters, but not enough to reduce the price of electricity. There's support to rebuilding Transnet and Metro Rail. Those are positive to unlocking the economy. But we don't find enough to really get the economy moving. We don't find enough support for other embattled SOEs, be it SABC or Denel or the Post Office. There is some good measures to intervene on local government, but local government is in such a dire crisis. We need to see much more. We're quite disappointed around crime and corruption. There's no additional allocations beyond inflation for the police, for the courts, for the prosecuting authority. There's some allocations to the border management and the defense force, but not enough. So it's a mixed bag. There's some relief for the poor in terms of social grant increases at 9.6%, but there's no adjustment for the STD grant. There's no expansion of public employment programs. So we don't see out of it what is really going to get us to the 3% growth, which you need to reduce unemployment. We don't see what's going to help to actually reduce unemployment. There's no expansion of public employment programs. So there's some good parts, but there's quite a few disappointing parts too.
Talking about growth, does this budget support industrialization?
It doesn't. There's a very small allocation towards industrial financing, and in fact, the next year there's a cut towards it. And if we really want to get the economy growing to 3% and beyond, we need to give much more support to SMMEs, to industrialization, to export sectors. To give you a contradiction, we allocate more money, 4 billion rand, for bodyguards or politicians than we do for small business development. So there's a fundamental mismatch. If you really want to grow the economy, we've got to do much more.
All right, thank you so much, Matthew Parks. Of course, giving us the Labour Federation's analysis on the budget speech. Let's bring in now Health Minister, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. Minister, we are live on Channel 404, basically, on your portfolio, what are some of the key takeouts for health?
Well, the key one, which makes me very excited, is the announcement for a BFI, which opens today until March, where we are going to apply the budget infrastructure, facility for infrastructure, whereby the minister has announced the replacement of 3 academic hospitals. I've been fighting this battle from 2014. That's why I'm so excited that we need brand new 3 academic hospitals. That is George Mukhari Academic Hospital in Sefako Makgatho University, which we used to call Medunsa. It is King Edward VIII Hospital, which has been renamed Victoria Mxenge, at the Nelson Mandela School of Medicine. That's where I started 42 years ago. They've never had a hospital. Unfortunately, the minister announced it as Nkosi Albert Lituli. It's a mistake. I asked him to correct it, and I'm helping him to correct it. The last one is a hospital named after our icon, Utata Nelson Mandela, called Nelson Mandela Central Hospital in Mthatha. We've been fighting that it needs to be built so that it meets the standard and the stature of the man it was named after. And at long last, we have won that battle. And the minister said we are going to build those hospitals in preparation for NHI, because that's what we've been doing in the preparatory stage. I heard some people being excited that there's no more NHI and all that. They're just dreaming. We are in the preparatory mode, and putting up 8 academic hospitals is no child's play. The one in George Mukari is going to cost as much as 8 billion rands.
Quickly, Minister, I'm out of time. Are you going to be intervening in the appointment of this Froster in the Free State?
No, I thought the Premier has already done so. The Premier has already done so. Yes, we did intervene. I did speak to both the MEC and the Premier, and she has already removed him. But still, the Public Health Commission has phoned me. They want the names. They said they need to make an investigation. Whether it's removed or not, they still want to investigate what actually happened. Remember, it is the Public Service Commission has got that power. And why I asked the Premier to remove me, many of you believe, and I saw City Press, and I suspect it's deliberate, where they put my head there when they talk about this, as if it's me. I don't appoint a single person in any province, whether it's a doctor or a DTG or a nurse or what. It's a provincial competence, it's not me. So they put my photo there, as if, no, this is the man who's causing all these things. And I know why.
Okay. No, I'm out of time, Minister. I apologize for that. Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, Health Minister. For more reaction and analysis, we cross back to Nombu.
Thanks very much. I'm joined by Rifta Ajan. She is the SG of FEDUSA, also a Labour representative. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. Your thoughts on the budget?
Well, from organised labour, we don't necessarily want to be a thorn in the flesh at this stage. It has most certainly been one of hip and pomp, but unfortunately, from a labour perspective, from FEDUSA's perspective, we see debt stabilisation dominating the engagement here on the budget, but what we do not see is the ignition and the conversation about growing this economy, but unfortunately, the growth in terms of jobs is what we wanted to hear coming out a lot more prominent. Unfortunately, growth without jobs does not work for FEDUSA, does not work for Labour.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that. And now I'm joined by Edward Kiswitter, the SARS Commissioner, who of course has been responsible for collecting revenue for the past fiscal year. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us. So, not a bad feat by the Tax Administration for fiscal year 2025.
I think what's really pleasing, if we look where we were a year ago, and the quiet confidence we communicated to say that if we continue our investment in SARS, it reduces the need for the finance minister to look at raising taxes, which obviously he has to consider as one of his instruments. And so when the minister announced today that we will collect just more than 21 billion, then I'm very, very proud to say, of course, we have been helped a little bit by the mining and the finance sector performance. We've been helped a little bit by consumption taxes, but all the other indicators are down. The GDP is down. So where does this revenue come from? Well, our estimation, our calculation shows that about 2/3 of that will be delivered from the compliance effort of SARS. In other words, we are harvesting the benefit of a world-class and strong institution that is an institution that belongs to South Africans, and one that we should preserve and defend with our life.
Commissioner, look, I know it's not your place, but we know that you're heading out the door soon, and we don't know anything about a successor. It's important that you have somebody of like mind to continue with the momentum, right?
Well, the minister, of course, the minister has given a commitment that a successor will be announced by the end of the month. And hopefully, if not by the end of the month, in a few days thereafter. And I am eagerly awaiting to hear who that will be, and will pledge my support as I hand over the baton. Because, as I said, SARS is too important for South Africa to even miss a heartbeat. We have to continue the momentum. On the 1st of April, after we've announced our results, the scoreboard sets to 0, and we have to start this hard slog. Nompu, when I wake up on the 1st of April, or when we announce our results, there's two emotions. The one is we are so thankful that we delivered the results, and immediately anxious that there's no time to break, we've got to start the new year. And so we will want to do the same this year, make sure that even as we transition into the new year and as we pass the baton, the organization must keep functioning, must maintain the momentum, because South Africa and South Africans rely on us.
SARS Commissioner Edward Kiswita, thank you so much for your time, sir, and we will certainly be extending an invitation to talk to him a bit further on his legacy at SARS. Let me hand it over now to Bulelani.
Well, joining me now is Songezo Zibi, Rise Mzansi's president and chairperson of SCOPA. The minister has only got so much cake. The slicing is the challenge. How did he do? How did he fare in your view?
No, look, given that we only completed the adjustments in January, the budget was not a surprise, really. I think to most people that pay attention to it. But let me mention just three things, which I think are really important. The first is that from a Rise Mzansi perspective, we have been campaigning for better regulation of gambling and for more taxation on gambling. I think we're getting close. The public comment period ends on Friday, and then after that the Treasury will introduce tax proposals on how to tax more efficiently the gambling industry, so that some of that money can go towards the very victims of gambling. So from a Rise Mzansi perspective, we're very happy about that. The second thing, though, that's important, an additional 5.1 billion rand, I think, to PRASA. This is very important. People are struggling with the cost of transport. It's the biggest contributor to inflation and the high cost of living. If you live in Johannesburg, you live in the city of eThekwini, you live in the city of Cape Town, and so on, you will have more trains at peak time, up to as little as every 10 minutes at peak time, which I think is really great. The third thing, because I am from KSD in the Eastern Cape, the Nelson Mandela Academic Hospital is there. It gets a new oncology unit, which is really welcome, because cancer sufferers have to go to West London, have to go to eThekwini and so on for treatment, which I think is a good thing. But economic growth on 0.8% in 2 years' time, still too low. We need to get to 6% and get there fast so that we can create the jobs.
What's your view on the issue of economic growth targets? They always seem to be over-projected. Do you think that's deliberate? Because again, it goes back to the issue of revenue.
I've had this fight with every finance minister since Pravin Gordhan, where I say you always give an optimistic view of economic growth and then you come in underneath that. I think what we now need to understand is the importance of the structural reforms. The finance minister said something that the president has been saying in careful language before, and I think we have spoken about it before. The government needs to treat the rail system like it treats the road network. Build, own and operate the road network and license people to use it, such as truck owners and so on. Rail is no different. We can't expect Transnet to do everything. We finally crossed that hurdle. What is important is for the concessioning and licensing to be open, to be transparent, to be done quickly, and be subject to serious oversight. If we do that, we'll be able to start growing the economy a lot faster.
Nurses, teachers, and police personnel, are we able to fund those services given that they face the people directly on the ground?
It's not necessarily the teachers. By the way, one of the reasons I'm an advocate for using private money to fund public goods under government supervision is so that we can take that money and give it to education. Our schools, especially in black people's areas, in black communities, need internet, high-speed internet. Our kids need tablets and so that they can compete in the 21st century. It's still not okay for people to have to sleep on the floor because there's not enough money for capital expenditure on health services. That money needs to go there. That money needs to go to water and so on. So these ideological things that we get upset about, if you put measures in place, there's transparency, government continues to own the infrastructure, then you can grow the economy and invest in the South African people.
Thank you so much. Songezo Zibi Raizi Mzansi is present. For more analysis and reaction, we cross back to Nombu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined by Truus Tertius. He's a tax expert at Forvis Mazars. Thank you so much for joining us, Truus. So, from a tax perspective, do you think that the minister managed to strike the balance right?
I think so. I think it's a positive development for the fiscus. I think it's great that we're going to see less pressure on the middle class. We see less pressure by just the changes to the brackets, which was important. I think we saw the extra revenue that came in, that was collected, and that provided the relief that we also desperately needed.
Are we not worried that perhaps next year they might be asking for another 20 billion rand, which they didn't ask for this time round?
Well, let's hope SARS can keep on the trajectory that they have submitted under Edward Kieswetter, and that they can continue under the new commissioner who's on his way. So we can believe that the same amount or even more can be collected, and thereby staying with the trajectory. I think they've shown that they want to, that any additional tax revenue that's collected is going to go straight towards the debt, reducing that debt to GDP ratio, which is very important. And I think that's where the focus is going to be in the next year.
Thank you so much, Truus, for that. And now I'm joined by Dan Peter. He is from the Budget Justice Coalition. I spoke to him earlier. Thank you so much for joining us. Your thoughts on the budget?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So unfortunately, to a large degree, it does mirror some of the challenges we thought we were going to be seeing in the budget. So we have seen fairly anemic increases, sometimes actually cuts to many types of social spending. We are happy to see quite significant amounts of savings that have been made by the state, and we challenge the minister and dare him to dream bigger than just achieving stability, and to use that funding and use that savings, as well as the windfalls from commodities, to pay for social investment. And one of the most concerning areas we've seen has been massive cuts to the EPWP program, the Expanded Public Works program, and the presidential employment stimulus. And we really think that before the final bill is passed, we really need to see a proper investment in youth unemployment particularly.
Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to us. Let me hand it over now to my colleague Balenhle Mthethwa in Johannesburg. She's joined by a group of entrepreneurs who've been watching the budget closely to see how it speaks to them.
Yes, certainly, Nompu. We have been watching the budget very closely. There has been a large group of entrepreneurs, as well as business leaders and industry leaders, captains of industries who are here, particularly from from the construction sector, just speaking to us about what exactly they would like to hear from the minister. Mapifu, you had 4 items prepared. Were all those 4 items met by the minister's speech?
Thanks for that question. I think for us, they were in part answered. I think key for us was really looking at inclusion and particularly employment for young people. Secondly, for us was to really think about access to markets, particularly when we're thinking about infrastructure and the green economy. And thirdly, I think we're really kind of looking at issues around access to finance, and lastly, creating an enabling environment. So I think we did hear the ministers particularly speaking around issues around infrastructure, so that was really great for us, particularly when you're looking at opportunities for small businesses. But I think we wanted to hear a little bit more in terms of how they were going to ensure that effectively the small businesses would participate in this infrastructure boom. And in relation to kind of from a environmental perspective and operating environment, we really did welcome, some of the tax relief that the minister did pronounce, but I think we do recognize, an increase in the fuel levy would have a negative impact on small businesses, particularly when you're looking at transport costs. we are also looking particularly around inclusion and youth. I think we did hear the minister speak about that, particularly in relation to skills and artisanal skills. And I think that was quite crucial when you're thinking about youth unemployment within the country. But I think we wanted to hear a little bit more around particularly incentives for young people to be able to absorb these youth, and particularly not just from a short-term placement, but really looking at it from a long-term sustainability. And I think those were kind of the key issues that we're looking at.
In the past, I mean, how has the infrastructure sector been looking like? Because the last boom we had was just before the construction of the stadiums, and then we had somewhat of a lackluster period thereafter. Do you think that there's some form of growth potential at this point?
Yeah, most definitely. I think we've heard a lot in the numerous budgets, as well as a huge focus around infrastructure investment. I think the government is seeing it as a critical driver for growth and particularly job creation. And I think that's also particularly important for small businesses. And you are right in saying I think we have seen a lag, but I think we are kind of seeing that government is really critically driving this, particularly when you're looking at water and energy, which are critical for our country, as well as just trying to drive an enabling environment for SMEs.
Certainly, I mean, with the water infrastructure challenges that we've been facing, particularly here in Johannesburg, and hearing those commitments to ensure that government is able to address the maintenance backlog, your thoughts on this?
I think these are crucial. Like, I think when you're thinking about the ability for SMEs to really operate within our economy, these are crucial when you're looking at water and, like I said, energy as well. So I think even the government's focus, particularly with municipalities and increasing spend with municipalities, become critical, because I think that is where SMEs directly interact with the economy and where those services are provided. So I think those kind of areas, particularly around the reforming of municipalities, become crucial when we're looking at those kind of areas.
There you have it. Business really confident with regards to the interventions that have been put in place in order to assist municipalities and ensure that municipalities are able to meet their primary objectives. As a business owner, what are your biggest takeaways from this budget?
Thank you for the opportunity. Our biggest takeaway was the VAT capping. It was quite a very significant move that the minister have done. We really enjoy the leverage and the relaxation of the capping of the VAT, and also the increase on the budget on the border authority. That is quite a very significant move from the minister. As you know, that we have been challenged by the illegal immigration employment in the construction industry. It will actually help, to increase the creation of employment of our locals in the construction industry. Thank you.
Yeah. And with regards to, some of the contingency measures that you've had to put in place as a result of the difficulties or the water shortages that we've seen, how has that affected your business and your profit margins? And what do you make of the pronouncements that have now been made by the minister to increase infrastructure spend?
It's always good when the government is increasing the expenditure. The effects of the water crisis is very huge in our industry, especially the effect on our employees at the local level. It's quite a very big challenge, but it's also an opportunity from a business perspective for artisans as well. We'll really like to see the changes in terms of the employment of the artisans.
So what business are you in? Because I hear you speaking about young people as well as artisans, as well as, the employment of unskilled laborers, and also the competition that has been created by those who are coming from other countries.
We are in the construction industry. We're doing maintenance and repairs and plumbing.
Thank you. There you have it. Those are some of the entrepreneurs, particularly in the construction industry, just speaking to us on some of the biggest takeaways. We are getting more feedback from those who were also here, who are not only in the construction sector, but some who are in marketing and other sectors. But for now, it's back to you in studio, Nombo.
Thanks very much. Well, we are coming to the end of our special budget broadcast. Naturally, it seems as though there have been mixed reactions to what the Minister of Finance had to deliver. But of course, I think the really big deal is the fact that we are going to get our tax brackets adjusted for inflation fully for the very first time in more than 2 years. And also on top of that, the medical tax credit as well is also going to be adjusted in terms of inflation, which is really very positive indeed. But I just want to get some thoughts from my colleague, Bulelani Philip, who's spoken to a number of political parties. What sense did you get from them? Because, of course, some of them are very critical, of course.
No, what I think firstly is that there's going to be a mixed bag of reactions, as you've said before. And I think also at the same time, the parties that are within the government of national unity seem to be united around this budget. They're saying it's a positive one. It's taking the country in the right direction. And as the president said in his State of the Nation address, is that we are beginning to see some green shoots, and we also are on the cusp of a rapid economic development. But of course, those that are outside of the GNU poke holes in that they are saying this is business as usual, and it's not going to deliver the growth that is desired. Again, they also lambast the issue of the growth projections. They're saying they're overinflated and they are never achieved every time they are announced. So those are some of the takeaways that are coming out of this budget speech, particularly from the political parties.
All right, thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, it stands to reason that people are going to have differing views. And the other thing as well, people haven't really gone and looked in at the detail. That will take some time for us to find out what exactly are the nuts and bolts of the budget. But I think that's pretty much all that we have to deliver to you this afternoon. But of course, as the economics team, we will continue to break down some of the issues. And my colleagues who have been in the lockup reading the budget documents will be delivering solid, comprehensive packages that tell you, South Africa, what the budget means for you. In the meantime, we have to say a very big thank you to the people who are behind us, behind the scenes, who make a broadcast like this happen. It's a lot of hard work, early mornings. We appreciate you. Thank you very much, colleagues. And with that, it's pretty much back to studio. But before I say back to studio, Bulelani, you can say your last goodbye.
Well, my name is Bulelani Philip, and it's a wrap from us. Have a great day further.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much to my colleagues in Cape Town, Nompumelelo Siziba, as well as Bulelani Philip. And in Johannesburg, of course, Mbalenhle Mthethwa, giving us that rolling coverage of Budget 2026, delivered by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana a few moments ago. Well, there